Well, welcome to Hope Chats, and today is episode 4. Glad you can be with us. Today we have a special guest, Mackenzie Haskins, who's joining me today. Hi, Mackenzie.
Hello, Jim.
How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, doing well. Hey, can you just share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I'll go into it a bit later too, but yeah. So my name's Mackenzie, as Jim said, and I live up in Potsdam. I've been going to New Hope for probably like 4 years, which is about as long as I've been a Christian for. And I love it. I'm a science nerd, as you guys will find out, but I'm also a dance nerd. I love fairy tales. And I love gardening. That's a recent passion of mine. So that's a bit about myself.
Awesome, great. That's awesome. That's a fun bio. I like what you said.
That's why I put it in my resume.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's great. Perfect. Well, today we'll be talking about the topic of choosing joy, a great topic, especially in the COVID-19 and everything going on. There's so many challenges and difficulties, and I know sometimes it can be hard to find joy. I'm sure some of us who are watching live or maybe potentially watching the recording are potentially looking for joy. And so I'm really glad that we're able to talk about this, and specifically you'll be sharing about that. So I had a couple of questions I wanted to ask you for today. Is what got you interested in the topic of joy or joy itself?
Yeah. So as I said, I think I said it. I studied neuroscience in college, which was really fun. And I think I was really looking for like what are people seeking after, that sort of thing. But for the most part, we talked about like, oh, what does this part of the brain do, and what are neurons for? And that was really, really great. But during college, I actually struggled a lot with anxiety and depression, to the point where I had to medically withdraw from school. And then during that point, I found Jesus, which was awesome. But then when I found Jesus, I heard a lot of people talk about like, oh, joy and peace. And I kind of had this expectation that it was going to happen immediately instead of it being like this long process, which it has been for me. And I just became really, I guess, discouraged. And so out of that and out of my passion for neuroscience, I started becoming super interested. So I started experiencing like panic attacks, OCD. I started realizing that I had some trauma, some PTSD. And so I was like, how do I get out of this? Like, what does God have to say? So I started learning about like, well, how does trauma affect the brain? Why is joy harder for me, it seems, than anybody else? Like, what is wrong with me? And it was really cool. In that pursuit of research, I stumbled upon this neurotheologian. His name is Dr. Jim Wilder. And he he was a counselor with people in some of like the most traumatized, horrible psychological conditions that people said like they can't be healed. And he had begged God for a solution, and he started seeing transformation in his patients. And it all came out of initially from what he started learning about the brain and how it grows in joy. So the neuroscience of joy. So I wasn't looking for joy. I was actually kind of skeptical about it at first. But ever since then, it's become a big focal point. So I was surprised by joy, as C.S. Lewis would say.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing a little bit about yourself and just the difficulties and struggles you've been through, and potentially someone watching live or the recording might be able to relate to some of that.
Yeah.
So thanks for just being so transparent on Zoom and on Facebook and YouTube all at the same time. So that's pretty bold to be able to do that. Next question I want to ask you is, why is joy important?
Yeah. So other than that, it feels great to feel joyful. That's good. And joy helps you be creative, all of that sort of stuff. But the thing that I've been really narrowing in on recently is that joy helps you act like yourself. Like the part of your brain that knows who you are, that like has your identity, is connected to the part of your brain that's joyful. So if you're not in joy, you're actually struggling to act like yourself. You're actually struggling to be connected to your identity. And so that's super important. So for me, for example, I basically thought that my natural state was fear. to live in fear. I didn't even realize that I was afraid all the time. But I'm constantly like struggling with like OCD obsessions. Like, how do I get out of this situation? How do I get out of this feeling? I'm escaping all the time. That sort of thing. And then when I started practicing joy, I started noticing like myself just come to life. And I could experience creativity. My personality would come out. I would laugh. I could think of things that I wanted to do. And I was like, oh, this is who I am. I am a person of joy. I'm not a person of fear. I'm a person of joy. So it's just who we are.
Yeah, no, that's good. No, thanks for sharing on
Yeah.
that. You're mentioning the fear, and I definitely can struggle with fear stuff. I'm sure people watching this or the recording can. So you said sometimes you get stuck in fear. So you're stuck in fear and like, oh, I want joy. Are you able to get back to joy easily, or to choosing joy?
Now I can get back to joy sometimes. And this has been a learning process. So do you mind if I share a little bit about, I'll go back and forth between like the neuroscience and kind of my own personal experience to talk about. Awesome. Thumbs up. So here's like, we're getting into nerdy stuff. So the part of your brain that is connected to joy, it has a real fancy name, and it's called the right prefrontal orbital cortex. We'll call it the joy center or the joy muscle. And so for me, my joy muscle was not very strong. It had not been worked out very much. And it's growing. It's a little bit, it's done some push-ups. And so now when an emotional weight like fear and sadness and all this stuff kind of comes on me, I can push it off more easily because I've practiced joy. But that has taken a lot of practice. So I really think of joy as like something that you have to work out. It makes sense like with neuroscience. So if you have a really strong joy muscle, and this happens like throughout your lifetime. So if you were like a baby and your parents, they shared lots of smiles and joy with you, and they were just glad to be with you, then your joy muscles, they grew. And you could have like more control over your emotions, that sort of thing. And the more your environment invests in helping you grow in joy, then the stronger your joy muscle gets. So then when life happens, and big emotional weights are put on you. So an emotional weight, I think of like sadness, fear, shame, disgust, those sorts of things. If someone throws an emotional weight on you, if your joy is strong enough, you can push it off and you can not be crushed by it. But if your joy capacity or your joy muscle is really weak, it hasn't been trained throughout your life, or it was damaged at some point, then those emotional weights are going to crush you. Yeah. So that's a little bit of the neuroscience. And I think that kind of alludes to like, so what happens with people who don't have a lot of joy? Like, how does that kind of come about? And like I said, like joy it's something that grows throughout your lifespan, and it has to be cultivated by the people around you, by the people in your home, by the people in your environment. And so people who their joy, like their home environment wasn't joyful, they had that part of their brain, it was like really, really weak. And unfortunately, we're going to get depressing for like 1 second, but then it's going to go up really, really soon. I promise. So your brain, it goes through different seasons of your life where it actually prunes back or cuts back the parts of your brain that it doesn't use. And so people who've been neglected in the area of joy, or who have experienced trauma and were never able to put off that emotional weight, then at a certain point in their life, their brain kind of cuts back their joy center. And so they physically don't have the capacity to have joy. And so anytime something negative happens in their life, it overwhelms them and it crushes them, and they get stuck in that sort of emotion. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of, that's good stuff, real stuff. I appreciate you getting the neuro place, but I think you broke it down in a way we can understand.
I hope
I do have another question. We did get a question off of the Facebook.
Oh.
David Johnson was asking, he's just saying good stuff. He's asking, might there be more ways you can work out? So maybe some examples. I think we'll get to that, right?
We will.
Okay. I just want to make sure. Thanks, David, for your
Definitely.
comment on Facebook. Just want to acknowledge that. You kind of already alluded to this. Was any other thing you want to mention for just hope for people who are stuck in that place?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And I mean, I guess that's why we're calling it a hope chat. We wouldn't be here if there wasn't.
Come on, not despair chats. You can go on the news for that. Let's get some hope chat. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's really, really cool is a couple of years ago, people thought that your brain couldn't grow parts of it back. And there are some parts that it's harder to grow back. That's true. But the part of your brain, that right prefrontal orbital cortex, it maintains, fancy terminology, it's fetal biochemistry throughout your whole life. So basically, it can grow. So this is just God being awesome, I think, is he's like, no matter what bad stuff happened for you, I can bring redemption in the area of your brain. Like you have an opportunity for this to grow back. And I've been experiencing that in my own life. Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. No, thanks. There is hope. So I'm glad. I was guessing so, but glad to hear that. I appreciate you sharing from your own personal life testimony too, which I think is really, really powerful. Definitely super encouraging, and it's great to hear how you're making those steps. The last question I had is so next week, this is a part one. It's our first time doing a little series, but this is part one of Choosing Joy. But next week we're going to talk about more practical ways to grow in joy. And David Johnson was asking about that too on Facebook. But what's one thing we can start doing this week as we're awaiting with great anticipation for part two?
Yeah. So I think I'll share two things. One of them is one that I forgot to share a minute ago. And then I'll share the kind of more practical, quick thing. So I think with the neuroscience that we have now about joy, I think it calls for us to kind of redefine what joy is. And I think in our culture, we think about like joy is hiking a mountain or going and being in relationship with someone, being out in nature. And those are all good things. Or if we don't know how to have joy, this is where a lot of addictions come into play. If we don't know how to experience joy, we're stuck in a negative emotion and we are seeking comfort, then we go to things like, I struggle with food. I go to food, or people they go to porn, they go to that sort of thing. But I think in order to get healing, we need to redefine what joy is in the brain and how we're supposed to discover it. And so joy, I would say, is not found in a thing, but it is in relationship. And so when this is like life-changing for me. But so even like as we develop, like one of the critical periods for people to grow in joy is at like 9 months old. And if you see a 9-month-old, you're probably familiar with this, Jim. All the baby wants to do is just like smile at you and like look at you. And then they'll look away for a little bit and then they just want to do it again. And they'll do that like all day long. And that is growing their brain in joy. But they can't do that if they're by themselves. If they're like watching TV or they're, I don't know, whatever else you have. They can't cultivate joy on their own. Same with like a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, if they like are having a temper tantrum or something like that, they don't necessarily know how to get out of it themselves. And so you have to have a parent or someone that loves them sitting with them, helping them calm down, and then depending on what age they're at, like singing to them, using a soothing voice tone, or talking with them at an older age and helping them learn how to get from that frumpy emotion back into joy. And so it's all relational. And so people who've been traumatized, a lot of times either this didn't happen with them, they didn't have someone to walk with them to bring them back to a place of joy, peace, and comfort, or something happened where they stopped trusting people, whatever it was. And so relationships stopped becoming the place where you find true peace and comfort. It became a thing. I can't trust a person to bring me peace and comfort, but I can sure find chocolate reliable. That sort of thing. So we have to know that joy is relational. So as a church, let's say we have people who are really, really high in joy. We have a mix of people in our church, right? And around the world. But for those people who are high in joy, I think part of our responsibility is to teach the people who are low in joy to become relational. Maybe they didn't get what they needed as an infant. Maybe they didn't get what they needed as a child, and they have temper tantrums or whatever it is. They don't know how to get out of their fear, their shame, all of this sort of stuff. And so we walk with them. We become that person who's glad to be with them, regardless of how they're feeling. And we say, I'm going to help you get back to a place of security because joy is relational. And instead of being the hands and feet of Jesus, which we're being, we be the smile of Jesus. We be the delight of Jesus. And so in that, there are a lot of people who have a hard time even connecting with God because they don't know how to be relational. And so this is never meant to like be, oh, I'm now dependent on you for joy. But like, you help me learn how to find joy relationally. And eventually that helps me know how to connect to my Father, God, in joy, because Jesus is our true source of joy. He's the one who can give it to us unending. We can't rely on a person to feed it into our souls all the time. Rely on Jesus to feed it into us. But we need to be the people who disciple each other into God's hands. So a practical step, I guess, is if you're strong in joy, think about, is there someone who's weak in joy that you can walk with? And you can help them in one of the areas that you know that you're strong in. But if you need some joy, which is like during quarantine, we need some joy. A practical thing is gratitude, is appreciation. And that's really easy to do without other people around. So yeah, I think the reason why gratitude and appreciation works is because we're not like, oh, this thing is pretty. It's we're like, thank you for this. And so we're acknowledging that there's a gift, which means there has to be a giver. And so we're acknowledging that the giver wanted to give us something to bring joy. That person has love over us. So it starts our brain to think relationally and to acknowledge there's someone who loves me that wants to connect with me if they're willing to give me gifts. So appreciation.
That's awesome. This is really good stuff. So I know there's a couple of people watching live right now. I know there'll be a lot more watching the recording. Cool. Yeah, I love how you mentioned the hands and feet, but you can be the smile. I think you said a smile of Jesus.
Yeah.
And what a good reminder that every human relationships are so important, but ultimately Jesus is the source of joy, right?
Yeah.
No one can become that codependent, or you might go to chocolate, other people might go to people, but ultimately Jesus is the only one to find true joy, which is what a great reminder. So I appreciate you sharing that with me and ultimately us who's on the YouTube and Facebook and watching the recording. Any last thoughts before maybe we could wrap up? I don't know if we have any question we want to ask folks or
any questions would be great.
Okay, so if you are watching now, if you do have any questions for either now or in the future episodes, you can share those. And if you're watching the recording, feel free to put something in the comment because we'll revisit these videos. So if you put comments on YouTube and Facebook, we'll revisit that for part 2 of Choosing Joy as well. So.
Yeah. I guess a message I would say maybe to people is, especially during the season of quarantine, is to have grace for ourselves. I've noticed at first I started struggling a lot more with food. And at first I was kind of beating myself up about that. But then it actually turned into an opportunity for gratitude for me. Like I started eating more and actually scrolling through Facebook more and stuff on my phone. And I realized like what I was feeling lonely, but I didn't know that I was wanting a relationship. My brain didn't recognize it. And so it's turned into an opportunity for gratitude for me to be like, oh God, thanks for revealing that I need more of you and I need more of your community, more of your people. So we can just be grateful for what God's revealing through this difficult time. Yeah.
Super practical. So great way to work out some of the joy, elements, being grateful, finding a relationship or being that strong relationship. I really like how you got really nerdy at one point, but then you made it
I'm
really,
sorry.
really no, I love it. It's great. No, but you got it. It's great to have that, but you got it to something very specific, practical, like a relationship, and like something we could do this week, something we could do today,
Yeah.
which is great. Would you mind wrapping up our time? I didn't ask you ahead of time. Would you mind wrapping up, just praying for those who are just watching this live or the recording, that maybe are in a place like joy is like the last word they would use to describe themselves.
Absolutely.
And might you just, as someone that you've experienced a lot of things that maybe some people can relate to, and just inviting Jesus to bless those who are watching this live in the recording.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, I've been there. And God can help us out of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll pray. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. God, thank you that you are the God of peace. Thank you for the people watching this. God, I thank you that you're a compassionate Father. And God, I can just see you're weeping with those people who are struggling to find joy. You have deep compassion toward them and toward where they're at. But God, I pray, I know I have confidence that you can turn our mourning into dancing, our sorrows into joy. God, that is the end of days. It is everlasting joy. Sorrow and sighing will flee away, and everlasting joy and gladness will crown our heads. That is where we're headed. That is you. So I pray that the fullness of your joy would come in. God, I pray that you would help these people to start seeing your gifts all around them, and that you would give them glimpses of joy, God. And I pray that they would not get discouraged, but that they would be encouraged for the small little bits of growth, God. I pray that you would turn their worlds around and transform their minds to see and receive the light of Jesus. Just bless them, God. Thank you. Encourage their hearts in Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Awesome. Well, thanks, Mackenzie. Thanks so much for joining me on Hope Chats and being part of sharing hope with people on YouTube and Facebook and maybe beyond that. So this is part of a series. So we're planning to do this next week for part 2. So I'm excited for that. So feel free, if you do have questions and you're watching this, you can just comment on YouTube, comment on Facebook. We'll revisit all the posts, and I'm sure Mackenzie would love to answer your questions. So
if I right? know the answers.
Yeah, right, exactly. But it'd be fun. If you have any suggestions or feedback, feel free to let us know. Well, thanks for joining us for Hope Chats. We're trying to have hope-filled conversations during the week. This is episode 4, Choosing Joy, part 1. Join us for next week for episode 2. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Signing on. Yep. Bye, everyone.